All right, it is 7 p.m., so let's get started. My name is Quinn Ackerman. I'm one of the co-founders here at Parco, as well as the director of marketing, and I wanted to welcome everyone to the third episode in our second ongoing webinar series for federal employees. We've almost hit the year mark of how long we've been doing this. I think we're going to have to go back and check our dates. It was either the very end of February or the beginning of March of 2020. So this will mark just under a year that we've been doing these webinars for federal employees. This evening, I'm joined by my colleague, Daniel Hample. He will be managing all of the questions and the questions bar for you guys this evening as we go through the presentation. So thank you, Danny, for being on tonight. You know, I love seeing all the new faces that I'm seeing tonight, as well as some familiar ones as well. So for those of you who have been on before, this part's going to be a little bit of a repeat. We are PARCO. We stand for Pensioned Americans Retirement Company, and we are particularly experts on anybody with a pension, whether you be federal employees, state employees, local government employees, but particularly federal employees. And we help them strategize for their upcoming retirements and through all parts of their career. So whether they're just starting out, they're in retirement, they're getting close to retirement, and everywhere in between, we are here to help. So you may have actually seen us recently featured some of the places below, such as USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes. Our colleague John Mantia was published in Forbes this week talking about fund to fund. So you may have seen his article there or his feature there. But we've been featured in a lot of these publications, and we're really working on spreading the news about who we are, what we do, and how we help federal employees. So a few ground rules before we get started. For those of you who are new, our goal with these webinars is to cover a broad range of topics where each episode is its own specific topic where we're going more in depth. We certainly want to get more in depth on these topics, but we do try to keep them to under 30 minutes to keep them digestible. When you find that you have specific questions that pertain to your individual situation, reach out to us. We're here to help. That's what we do every day. But do also know that if you have that burning question that you need answered right away, you can ask that question in the questions window. And that's where my colleague Danny is. He'll be helping you guys answer those questions as we go through the presentation. Also be receiving a survey email afterwards in your email inbox. We're just looking for feedback. We're always looking to improve, wanted to know your thoughts on the webinar. So please be as candid as possible. We also are taking suggestions for future webinar topics. In fact, some of our most well-attended past webinar episodes have come from feedback from you guys who are looking for us to cover something specific. So please give us examples of things you'd like to see covered in the future, and we'll make it happen. Okay, so now getting into it. Tonight's presentation is about military buyback for federal civilian employees. And I just want to make a point here that this is military buyback as it pertains to people who have separated from the military who are now working as federal civilians exclusively. This is not pertaining to any military buybacks that apply to other forms of military retirements. And this also doesn't apply to those of you who left service, started a federal civilian job, actually went back to service while still employed by the federal civilian government and came back to your federal civilian job. Those are different rules there, and we'd be happy to go through those situations with you individually. But do know that everything covered tonight is about military buybacks for federal civilian employees. And before we move forward, everyone who is here with us tonight, we thank you for your service. Spouses of service members, families as well. We all know you guys have a really tough job, so thank you. Today's agenda is going to cover a few different facets of military buyback. We're first going to talk about those individuals who are eligible, as well as the types of service you can expect to be allowed for a military buyback. We're going to touch on a little known rule known as the double dipping rule. Then we'll get into how buybacks will actually increase your federal civilian benefits, what the cost of that's going to look like, what you can expect there, and then the break even of how long you need to wait before that investment's going to pay off. And after we cover all of those components of the military buyback itself, we're going to get into the process of what you actually need to do and the tangible steps you need to take in order to buy this time back. So first, beginning with the eligible people and service. Those who are eligible to buy military time back and apply it to a federal civilian pension are federal civilians. So it doesn't matter what retirement system you fall under, whether it be FERS, CSRS, or CSRS offset, federal civilian employees and recent retirees are eligible for the military buyback process. The same applies to spouses or former spouses of deceased federal civilian employees. So if you fall in that category, you are also going to be eligible to buy back your late spouse's time. The important thing to keep in mind here, though, is that this applies to those who have not yet started your pension. So you can be a recent retiree, but if you've started collecting your pension, you will no longer be able to buy that time back. Same thing for spouses here. If your survivor application has been processed and you are receiving a benefit there, you will not be able to buy that time back. Now, the type of service you can buy back is active duty that was performed under the uniformed services and it was terminated under honorable conditions. There are a few exceptions here, but this is a pretty steadfast rule. Um, to give you guys some examples of time that wouldn't count, any sort of reserve time or a discharge that happened under less than favorable conditions will not be applicable for a military buyback. So it's got to be that active duty time and it's got to be terminated under honorable conditions for you to be able to go through this process. Now, there's a little bit of nuances as well in terms of the branches themselves that do participate in this program. So, if you served under the United States Army, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and or the Navy, you will be eligible to buy back that active duty time if you choose. A few exceptions here. If you served under the regular Corps or Reserve Corps of the United States Public Health Service, and that time occurred after June 30th of 1960, you can buy that time back. Similar concept for those who were commissioned officers of the NOAA. If that time occurred after June 30th, 1961, it's eligible for the military buyback as well. Um, for those of you who served under the United States National Guard, unfortunately, this time is very rarely creditable. There are a few exceptions, such as time served under a call by the president or a few specific special appointments that you see listed here. But if it doesn't meet one of these requirements, unfortunately, you cannot buy back that service. Okay, now that we've gotten the individuals and the types of time that applies to to military buyback itself, let's get into this double dipping rule. This double dipping rule is referring to those exclusively who are receiving a military reserve retirement. So if you are an individual receiving a military reserve retirement and a portion of that retirement consists of active duty time, this is one of the few times you'll actually be able to double dip that time towards both a military reserve retirement and a federal civilian pension. So that active duty time will apply, if you buy it back, will apply to a federal civilian pension and will also still count toward your military reserve retirement. So you're not forfeiting benefits from either one, and you essentially get to double dip it. So very little known fact that again, a lot of people don't know about. So if you are currently receiving a military reserve retirement and you are a federal civilian and some of that time was active duty, reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to help you figure out if you're able to buy this time back and what that's going to look like and how that's going to change your benefits. So, how exactly does buying back this time improve your civilian benefits? Well, many of you already may know the whole reason that people do this is so that you can get a bigger pension. For each additional credible month of military service that you buy back, it will increase your pension by that month. So, the more time you buy back, the bigger you can expect your federal civilian pension to be. Another really cool part about it is that it's one of the few types of time that you can tack onto your pension that will actually make you eligible for retirement sooner. So, for those of you who are familiar with federal civilian pensions and how they work, you can add types of time back like sick leave. Sick leave is going to increase your pension calculation for each whole month of service that you tack onto it, but it's not going to make you retirement eligible any sooner. With military time, it actually will. So it's going to essentially push back your service computation date to make it look like you were hired by the federal civilian government earlier, and it can make you retirement eligible sooner. We're going to go through an example later where you see how that plays out, but it's a really unique part of military buyback, um, that can be a strategy you guys can utilize as well. An important point to note, though, as you guys are going through this, is that while it will increase your pension, it's not going to increase the FERS supplement. The FERS supplement is a supplement that's available to federal employees who retire with full eligibility before the age of 62. It's meant to bridge the gap between retirement and the age of 62, when a lot of individuals choose to turn on Social Security. But this FERS supplement formula is only going to include FERS service. So there's going to be no way for you to add your military time on there, and you should not expect to see it reflected in your FERS supplement payments. Now let's get into the cost, and what exactly you're going to have to pay for in order to get this process done. So in order to understand what you're going to have to pay, it's first important to understand what your military base pay is. And this is your total basic pay that you received during your military service. So it's not going to include any allowances, no flight pay, no combat pay, none of the sorts. It's really just your total basic pay that you received during your service. Now, to pay for a military buyback, you're going to have to make what's known as a military deposit. And the military deposit is the amount of that will differ depending on what retirement system you fall under. So if you are a CSRS employee, recent retiree, it's going to be roughly 7% of your base pay. The number is going to vary a little depending on the years that you served, but roughly 7% of your base pay plus any applicable interest. With FERS, you're going to pay roughly 3% of your base pay. Again, varies on the years that you served, but around 3% plus any applicable interest. Now, the interest that you pay is an annual variable rate. And this means that it changes every year, as you can see here by this chart. Back in the 80s, we saw it get as high as around 13%, mid-teens. More recently, it's fallen much closer between the 1 and 2% range. Now, the initial rate that you owed when you first separated is certainly smaller than if you wait, as the interest accrues over time. But even if you waited, that doesn't mean that it's a bad financial decision to buy this time back. And in fact, we're going to detail exactly why it's still good to buy that time back when we get to the break-even portion of our presentation. One other important point to note here is that you are going to have an interest-free grace period. So after you first separate from your military service, you're going to have 2 years after you separate where no interest is going to accrue on your time. So you do have that 2 years where you could buy that time back and there's not going to be any interest accrued at all. On the third anniversary of your separation, do expect that interest will start to accrue annually, and it will continue to accrue annually until that deposit is paid. So, when can you pay for it? Really, you can pay for it anytime before your pension begins. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. It's just worth noting again. So, anytime before the retiree's pension begins, or if you're a spouse or a former spouse of a deceased federal civilian employee, it would be before the survivor application is finalized. And the reason I really wanted to hit on this point again is that you can buy that time back right after you retired if you want to. We certainly don't recommend it though. If you can do it while you're employed, please do, because when you're still employed and you do it, you get to go through your HR channels, which is a much more efficient and straightforward process. It still takes a while, but if you were to retire and go through this process, you're going to have to go through OPM, which is an even more convoluted and tedious process, and it can take even longer. So if you can, please utilize the fact that you can use your HR channels and do so before you retire. So getting into the break even here. The break even is basically, doesn't make sense to buy this time back. And if it does, how long do you have to live for this to be a financially beneficial decision? So we're going to use an example here to detail exactly how this plays out. I'm going to give you three examples. We've got United States Air Force Allen, Army Arthur, and Navy Nancy. They have three very different situations. As you can see, they served for varying periods of time. They all made totally different amounts while they were in the military. They all then became federal civilians, worked for different amounts of time there, made different amounts of money as federal civilians as well. They even bought back their military time at different years. And on top of that, their last year of military service varied as well. The reason we really wanted to make these so different is that, it's easy to think, or it's honestly intuitive to think, okay, there's got to be situations where this makes sense and where it doesn't. Depending on how many years it's been or what you were making, it's got to make more sense for some rather than others. And that's definitely a common thought process we encounter with a lot of the clients that we talk to. But as you can see, it's actually beneficial for all of these people, even though their situations are totally different. So they each paid, they each had a different base deposit before interest accrued, and they each waited different periods of time. So they each paid a pretty varying amount of money in order to buy this time back. But here's where you're going to start to see the similarities. All of their federal civilian retirements have benefited greatly from the fact that they bought this time back. So let's take Army Arthur. If he was to retire without buying this time back, he was going to have to do what's known as an MRA plus 10 retirement. It's a type of early retirement where his pension is reduced by the amount of time that he retires before full eligibility. Well, when he bought this time back, he's now eligible for a full retirement. He doesn't have to worry about any of his benefits going away. He's collecting a larger pension. It was certainly beneficial for him to do so. Then you've got someone like Navy Nancy. She was going to collect a full retirement either way. It says that she was fully eligible without her buyback. But because she bought that time back, she actually pushed back her service computation date so that she retired with enough years to give herself the pension booster. The pension booster is another FERS benefit that's available to those who retire after age 62 with over 20 years of service. Because she bought that time back, it gave her over 20 years. So she gets a 10% boost to her pension for the rest of her life. She went from what would be a little under $1,900 a month in pension payments to almost $3,000. So as you can see here, even though all these people had very different situations, it took all three of them under 2 years for them to start making more money than what they invested into the buyback in the first place. So for those of you who anticipate living in retirement for more than 2 years, 3 years, uh, it is a very great investment to buy this time back. Now, Arthur, Alan, and Nancy, all right, they're in. They've decided they want to pay for it. How are they going to do it? They have two options here. They can either pay it back and make that military deposit in a lump sum one-time payment, or they can elect deduction installment payments through payroll deductions. This option here, these installment payments, are available to those who do have a decent bit of time before they retire, so that the payroll deductions will eventually equate the entire military deposit. But for those of you who are soon going to be retiring and won't be able to elect this installment option, if you feel like you maybe don't have the cash on hand or feel like it's a lot to pay all at once, a strategy we often help former military members with who are now federal civilians is what's known as a TSP loan. So, what you can do as a federal civilian is take out a TSP loan for the amount of that military deposit, then pay off the military deposit and either retire with that loan or pay back that loan over time. You'll have two options. There's a rumor that often goes around that if you have an outstanding TSP loan, you can't retire with one. It's totally untrue. You can absolutely retire with an outstanding TSP loan, and you can choose to either pay it back or let it count as a taxable distribution for that year. So if you think that you may need to pay for this in a lump sum and aren't sure the most efficient way to do so, please reach out to us. We can help you figure out if utilizing a TSP loan makes sense for your situation. So now that we've gone through all these different facets and components of the military buyback, let's get into the process itself. From a high level, what you're essentially doing is you're acquiring and sending your earnings during your military time, letting the military know that you did serve. They like to see a proof of service. And then there's going to be some waiting. You're waiting for an earnings receipt from HR. You got to fill out the application and make a deposit, and you got to wait for that payment documentation to come through. Don't worry, we're going to go through all of these steps individually, but from a high level, this is essentially what you're doing. The first step that you're going to want to do is to complete the request form for estimated earnings during your military service, which is the form RI 2097 here. And you're going to want to do that for each branch of service that you plan to buy back time from. So when you have that, do attach your certificate of release or discharge from active duty, also referred to as your DD 214, and records of pay or promotion to that RI 2097 and submit both of those to your HR. Now, if you don't have your DD 214 handy and you need to get another copy, all you need to do is send standard form 180, SF 180 to the National Personnel Record Center in St. Louis. If any of you need that address, just let us know. We'd be happy to send it to you, but they'll send you a copy of your DD 214. So you've got your DD 214, you attach it to your RI 2097, as many of those as you need, and you submit it to HR. You've got to go through a little bit of a waiting period. Your military payroll office is eventually going to return that completed RI 2097 to you, which is going to tell you your total estimated earnings during your military service. This step, though, can take several months depending on how much they've got going on. So it's better to start this process sooner rather than later to get that clock rolling. Once you've gotten that RI 2097 back, it's going to be time to actually start the process of making that deposit. So if you're a FERS employee, you're going to want to fill out standard form 3108. If you're CSRS, you're going to want to fill out standard form 2803. These are both just the applications to be able to make your deposit, and you're going to send that into HR as well. After HR receives that, they are going to send you a payment authorization form. And this form is how you choose how you would like to pay your deposit. So whether it be that lump sum or via payroll deductions, like we talked about earlier, this is where you're going to elect exactly how you want to do that. So after you fill all that out, submit that to HR, and then you have a little bit of a waiting period again. So eventually your payroll office is going to send you a letter documenting your payment. That's how you know that your military buyback process has been successfully completed. And when you retire, that time it will be accounted on your pension calculation. Eventually, and we've seen somewhat of a delay on this as well, your service computation date will be updated in the payroll's database to reflect this time that you bought back. So Parco strategists, we're here to help. If you need help figuring out if the buyback process makes sense for you, how to get this process started, what it'll look like, and everything in between, we're here to help. We can also certainly help you figure out exactly how much buying back your military time will increase your pension, and what you can expect there as well. And as I'm sure you guys know, there's also a lot of changes from working in the military to working as a federal civilian employee. So some of your benefits are going to change. Some of the strategies you want to implement are going to change. And we're more than happy to walk you through all of that. Here's our works cited from this evening. If you need a copy, you'd like to do some additional research on your own, we're more than happy to send this to you. And we've got some upcoming webinar topics on the docket as well. Next week, we're going to be talking about sick leave, a very unique benefit for federal employees. And there's a lot of arguments out there as to what is exactly the best way to use your sick leave. We're also going to detail your disability retirement, comparing Medicare to FEHB. We're also going to do a retirement paperwork webinar, and I'd also like to note on the last Sunday of every month, we are going to start actually getting online and filling out the retirement paperwork itself from start to finish. So if you'd like to join us on any of those workshops, let us know. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we're also going to be hosting a webinar on transitioning from a veteran to a federal civilian, how your life changes, what you need to be aware of, making sure you're taking advantage of the strategies and benefits that are available just to you guys, and the kinds of things that are going to change, and how to anticipate and prepare for those changes. If you need to reach out, you can email us at info@goparco.com. You can also call us at 833-GO-PARCO. A real person will always answer the phone every time. Or you can reach out to us directly on our website, goparco.com. I applaud everyone for being on tonight. We're going to hang around in the comments section for a little while, go through the questions you guys have, see what we can answer, and see how we can be of help. So feel free to stick around. If you have questions you would like answered, type them in the question window, and one of our team members will get those answered for you.